Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at Anhalt, a Tier 7 premium German battleship. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, then we'll discuss commanders, run down the stats, and finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, there should be some time codes in the description to help you out. As far as the history of the Anhalt, the year is just about any. So many, if not all, of the world's governments are drawing up plans to frighten or kill their neighbors, or more specifically, the year is 1916. A few years ago, a Serbian shot an Austro-Hungarian, so naturally Germany and England are at war. There are plenty of other countries involved too, not the least of which is France, which is mostly not enjoying the most extensive excavation and anti-terraforming project to this point in human history, but kind of playing the backseat in the naval scene since they took the road less traveled. Germany's plan to either ingratiate or earn enough respect from England by building a world-class navy so that they could coexist or potentially even be friends has obviously not played out as intended. Building off earlier plans from the Bayern class of battleships, then nearing completion, German designers are already at work iterating on an even more powerful class of Linienschiff, or ship of the line, a more old-fashioned term than Schlachtschiff, or battleship, that many of us are used to. Somewhere in the middle of this process, you have the Battle of Jutland, the most significant naval encounter since Trafalgar. On paper, in terms of ships and men lost, it looks a bit like a tactical German victory. Nevertheless, it does send everyone involved, and even curious onlookers, back to the drawing board. British shipbuilders endeavor to make their battlecruisers less explodey, while Germany wants tougher, faster, and more potent battleships, basically everything. Kaiser Wilhelm calls this idea an Einheitsschiff, which means quite literally unified ship that has the speed of a battlecruiser but the uncompromised firepower and protection of a battleship. While Einheitsschiff today is synonymous with a cargo ship, basically what he was talking about was a fast battleship before that really was the thing. Similarly, Vice Admiral Scheer wanted even more powerful battleships following Jutland, which meant new designs for a non-existent 42cm gun, which is basically 16.5 inches. He also hopes that these ships would be able to cruise around at 32 knots. Optimistic. The 42cm gun was designed, but none were ever built, and more fast battleship designs were drawn up, though none of them reached 32 knots. Likewise, the shifting priority to unrestricted submarine warfare and the Kaiserliche Marine's inability to even get all of the hulls repaired after Jutland underscored that was most likely a strategic defeat and that building these designs was not going to be doable. To get back to the game a bit, the Anhalt is a representation of Design L21, with a couple of concessions, past that it was never built. The first and largest is its main battery, the replacement of 10 38cm artillery with 15 35cm instead. Beyond the doubt that such a thing would even fit, Germany was never really a big fan of turrets with 3 guns. They tend to be cramped and, at this point, remember we're in 1916, they were thought to be inefficient. You'll find them on the later Scharnhorst class, but that was not only a temporary plan that was originally intended to be replaced by dual 38cm guns, but the only other German ships that you'll generally see with 3-gun turrets are light cruisers. Some consideration was given to 4-gun turrets in hopes of saving weight, but those benefits were thought to be minimal and likely less efficient. The 35cm gun doesn't make a lot of sense. Now there was a 35cm gun developed for the Mackensen class of battlecruisers, with 9 being built and later destroyed as part of the Versailles Treaty. That doesn't match the general direction of the project though, and it certainly wouldn't have solved the problem of armor at Jutland, which generally held up even better than anyone expected. The second is that this ship is not the Linienschiff 21 as designed because it has been updated to a World War II standard, particularly in the AA category. In a sense, it makes a particular kind of sense because the peer of this ship, had it been built, would have been those of the Queen Elizabeth class battleships, and the Linienschiff 21 design outweighs that particular class by an expected 10,000 tons. And then you have to consider that battleships very rarely come in underweight. Last but not least, the name is a reference to the historic region of Anhalt, with the Sable Bear on top the Jewel's Castle being the heraldry for the Free State of Anhalt, which is located in the southern part of the current Bundesland of Sachsen-Anhalt. As for Anhalt in-game, she's the 6th German premium battleship at tier 7, I think the 8th including the tech trees. And in spite of being in good company, the Anhalt is unlike anything that has come out before it. If you're a big fan of German battleships, it may be worth actually watching a bit more of this video, which I know is long, because it really is quite different. Looking at the ship's strengths, Anhalt has both a large number of guns and also a surprisingly good dispersion. With 15 guns, you just assume this thing would chuck shells carelessly in the general direction of an enemy ship, particularly as a German ship, and then find itself subject to a punitively long reload, only to miss all of its shots on the next volley too. That's not really true here. Reload isn't great, but it's not overly long, and it actually does seem to land its shells with surprising consistency. And while it is pumping out that hate, it's also reasonably well protected from being punished in return, with a well-armored deck, good belt, and interior protection, and not only surprisingly little superstructure for a German ship, but surprisingly little superstructure overall. The downside to Anhalt is, when she lands all of these shells, a lot less happens than what you would expect. Since these are only 35 centimeters, 13.8 inches, they're pretty small, you can't punch the nose of most cruisers you'll face, and the HE will actually shatter off a lot of well-armored targets. Even the AP has almost comically terrible penetration characteristics, which means even if you are able to get into position to really punish another battleship, you're almost certainly better off aiming upper belt rather than trying to land a shot into its citadel. And that's even if you can get into that position. Anhalt is slow. Think government levels of bureaucracy slow. Maybe that's a bit unfair, but the ship is also huge, it doesn't turn particularly well, and at least from the player's default perspective, it's definitely moving around with the sort of distant and disconnected urgency common only among tortoises and DMV workers who are just totally over it. But in hearing all of those strengths and weaknesses, if you haven't heard anything that sounds particularly like a German battleship in a game, that's mostly because this ship doesn't have a lot in common with any of them, other than the flag. You also don't hear me saying this is stealthy. That's simply because it is not so. In any case, this all makes it particularly hard to put a finger on who would want to play this ship, because it's not really easy to point out another ship and say, yeah, Anhalt is kind of like that, just swap this for that, or maybe it does this particular thing different, it has an extra consumable, whatever. Anhalt is very much an oddity that is in a league of its own, a ship that is nearly as good as it is perpetually frustrating. As you look at a commander, the most freeing realization you can have here is that, to some degree, it doesn't really matter what you do on Anhalt. Commanders will change your experience, yes, but the ship will always be pretty accurate, it's always going to struggle to pen anything, it's always going to be huge, and it's always going to be strange. So you take Auto Ciliacs with all the normal stuff. On the bright side, the extra hit points here will help just like on any other build. Thanks to the ship, you still aren't missing all that many shots, and you may make your secondary battery better, but you don't have particularly good secondaries. The speed issue is going to hurt you here, because even though you do have good range on those secondaries, the only people who will end up in it are people who have either run out of room to run away, or folks who willingly drive into it. His base trait is likely going to end up being more useful because you're a bit more likely to get a broadside target once or twice a game than to get into secondary range, so it definitely won't hurt the ship. So maybe instead you choose Franz von Hipper and figure you'll hit all of your targets from range. The thing is, you probably would have anyway, and there's such a thing as too much accuracy, particularly with ships that have rather slow shells. The extra range will always leave you with extra possibility and further insulate you from how non-maneuverable this ship is. It will, however, leave you slower, less responsive, and sometimes just a little bit too far away from the action. Then you also have the issue of potentially burning to death. So would you run it with the base commander, Reinhard Scheer? On the bright side, you could make the Anhalt almost as stealthy as the info screen seems to say it is. Going into torpedoes is almost certainly a mistake, but it's at least possible on Scheer. So what do you get really? Probably a bit more health, though not nearly as much as with Ciliacs, better damage control party reload, and less reason maybe to use it, and probably a bit of extra speed. It's an interesting question. All of these answers are right, and really, all of these answers are wrong too. So drilling a bit deeper into the stats, please remember all of these that you're going to see on screen are base statistics, though the concealment does include the camo that comes with the ship. Anhalt has a pretty healthy amount of hit points at 69,500. The 16 to 350 millimeters of armor doesn't look that great on paper, but this might be one of the few places where the ship does resemble other German battleships. That is, that she doesn't have a great belt armor, but she is overall well protected. Your 350mm belt is unlikely to defeat any battleship shells or even the spicier cruisers out there, but scoring penetrations is likely where that's going to stop. The Anhalt has a submerged turtleback with a very aggressive angled 30mm plate, so citadels are going to be few and far between, even if you're doing something incredibly silly. Another favorable thing is you've got a 50mm main deck, a well-armored casemate, and relatively small superstructure overall. The downside to this design is really the torpedo protection is not good, just 20%, and considering Anhalt's size, you really do struggle to avoid the fish in this ship. Another minor downside is all of these casemate mounted guns create a lot of shot traps where, even if you have your boat well angled against a threat, there's always going to be a little part of your ship that's either turned directly towards the enemy or an angled surface that's just going to bounce this shell into some other part of the ship. So in spite of how good all of this orange and yellow might look, Anhalt will, more than occasionally, take damage when you don't feel like you should have. Anhalt's artillery is an initially daunting set of 15 350mm main battery. That's 3 more guns than Brandenburg, and they're individually larger, so naturally you'd be expecting this to deliver an even more punishing broadside than that other German ship. On an individual damage level, you've got 4,000 on your HE with a 27% fire chance, then 9,500 on the AP. The HE is 10% more damage than Brandenburg, the same fire chance, which is overall pretty low on a per shell basis. Having a lot of guns though means that on average she's a pretty good fire starter for a battleship, and you'll likely be sticking with HE because the AP performance is pretty miserable. Again, owing to the caliber, 9,500 is 100 more than German 12-inch guns at this tier, and since you have 15 of these guns, the DPM looks good on paper, but penetration is shockingly bad, which has, in my experience, turned a broadside Vladivostok, a target that does look a lot like a free dev strike to most battleships, into just a shatterfest of 0 damage. Similar to Scharnhorst, this means you'll want to generally aim upper belt, so a lot of this damage does get sacrificed against everything but broadside cruisers, and the AP is something you'll want to use and plan for judiciously. Something that won't be too easy to do considering your relatively average 30-second reload time. You also have a 45-second turret rotation, which is tied with more than a dozen ships for slowest at the tier, and it's far from surprising on a ship with 15 guns. The stated range of Anhalt is a pretty good 17.2 kilometers, but just another minor warning is that firing at extended ranges in Anhalt is a bit on the tricky side, at least against anything other than a slow or stationary battleship. The shells have a pretty long flight time. Compared to Bismarck, they're just slower, and even next to the relatively casual flight time of American battleships, the flight time might start out better but quickly loses out due to drag, meaning that if you really want to make this a long-distance battleship, you'll be looking at several additional seconds worth of flight time versus even leisurely shells. And then I threw in Veneto for further comparison purposes, just for fun. It would be wrong not to talk about the secondary battery on a German ship. Good thing is that you have a very healthy 6.8 kilometer range. With 6 dual 105mm and 8 150mm though, that's not a lot of guns. And while there are worse German battleships to spec into secondaries, I'll just say this isn't going to be anywhere near as effective as you'll find on Brandenburg and Bismarck, and as far as I can tell, it's somewhat underwhelming to even try. Anhalt comes with torpedoes. I haven't mentioned that because you are unlikely to get to use them in any constructive manner. You have 4 single launchers that fire an absurdly large 700mm torpedo that deals an enormous 25,600 damage. They have a listed 6 kilometer range, like so many other German torpedoes, but travel at just 54 knots, which is actually slower than Italian torpedoes at this tier. They also have a very high 1.7 kilometer detectability, so even if, for some reason, the enemy doesn't quite notice the 750-foot long battleship bearing down on them, not quite the longest reaction time in the game, but it's close. You have 4 single launchers, and they basically fire to the 4 quarters of your ship, basically in all directions other than straight ahead, behind, or straight to either side. In a surprise to no one, AA on Anhalt isn't very good. The 70 rating is driven mostly by the relatively short 4.5 maximum range, and because its combined 342 damage per second is about 15% below average. It probably goes without saying that being extremely large, slow, and incapable of turning probably doesn't help your overall game experience where carriers are concerned, but we haven't talked about maneuverability yet, really. So let's do that. I have to admit that to some degree my complaints about this are a bit unfair, because it's not so much disastrous on the face of it, as this ship is far too big to work well with these sorts of numbers, though the numbers still aren't good. At 26.5 knots, you're the 3rd slowest battleship at the tier. Your turning circle is about 60 meters wider than average, which is 5th worst at the tier, but your rudder is pretty average. The issue that probably makes this feel really bad is that of all the wide turning battleships out there, they're all at least 2.5 knots faster than you. Some are over 7. And so the wide turning circle makes a certain amount of sense. On such a slow ship, maybe not quite as much. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and say you're neither going to get anywhere particularly quickly in the ship, nor are you going to get out of the way. As far as concealment, Anhalt is really nothing special. The unmodified sea detectability is 15.3, which is as dead center average as you get at this tier. Similarly, 12.2 is average from air. Your smoke firing penalty is relatively short though, so if you want to sit and smoke half a map away and shoot your guns, this 13.1 rating is going to let you do that. But I rather imagine that's not what people think of when they think of a stealthy battleship. Jumping into consumables, Anhalt has a standard damage control party. After that, you'll have a totally normal repair party, 3 charges restoring 0.5% of your HP for 28 seconds. Nothing special there. Then we're going to get into a 3-way choice between a fighter plane, a spotter plane, or secondary consumable. Curiously, fighter plane might be your best option here. It will grant you at least the perception of being defended from air attacks, and to the degree that fighters can see over nearby islands, occasionally still useful. It's not going to be useful in every game, which is why you might choose to take spotter plane instead. Because unless you've passed out on the couch again, you're probably going to shoot your guns. The reason this isn't a total win is because you're probably going to hit anyway. You're probably going to use it at longer ranges, and that's already kind of the area where it's kind of easiest to dodge. So the shotgun effect can actually be helpful in this case. In any case, it does the normal things, it's just not on a normal ship. Then the secondary consumable isn't all that great. It does normal things again, and you do have good secondary range, but your DPM, like we've said, is pretty awful, so maybe not the best choice. It's going to help you make the most out of it, but probably something you're not going to use every game. Then last but not least, you have sonar. This is actually pretty powerful German cruiser sonar, which will at least give you a few more seconds to notice the torpedoes that are probably going to hit you anyway, or if you're lucky enough to get close to something, actually spot enemy ships from a further distance. And as we finally come along to some gameplay, we're going to be on Sea of Fortune. I'm obviously going to be in Anhalt because that's why we're watching the video. I'll go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. We are using Reinhardt Share, and that's probably a bit surprising, but I do like to occasionally include these because I do actually play all of these commanders just to make sure I'm not doing something silly or that I don't realize some sort of hidden secret about how to play the game. In this case, I actually rather like this because this ship is surprisingly accurate, and if I had gone into it as a typical German battleship, I'd probably just play secondaries and I'd probably be disappointed. If I went into it as just your standard, I like to sit on the back of the map line battleship commander, I know that's not you, dear viewer, listening, but if you were to do that, you could understand that accuracy, range, etc. would be great. In this case, what I value is speed, and what I value is being able to heal, and the ship's going to do the rest of it for me. A lot of this particular build is wasted, on just stuff that isn't that great, because we're using a base commander, Sheer, inspired by a base commander, Murray, yet another base commander, Angelico, who's going to help us get a little bit more hit points back if we start taking a lot of damage. So we're rolling out to the west side of the map. You can see we've already landed a bit of damage. We've got a ship on fire out there. And that's great. That's great because we're kind of hoping he burns his damage control party, because we would really, really love to catch him on fire again. Sparing that, we'll just take the standard damage. You're going to see a lot of HE shot in this game. We do land a second decent salvo. We're up to 27,000 damage. And all of that's with HE. Our hope is, if someone does spot the Richelieu, to go ahead and put another load of shells on him. What I'm doing right now is splitting up my forward and rear guns. With 15 shells, I started to think about whether or not it made sense, particularly if you were any source of accurate, to shoot all of them at any particular target all at once. My general theory is probably not. I don't know that I have any math to back that up, but let's just say this: it's definitely not the craziest theory that has ever been proposed in World of Warships. Now, you do see me switch over to AP. We do have the Pan-Asian light cruiser out there, which we wouldn't mind slapping in the face. He doesn't have a lot of armor, even among ships that don't have a lot of armor. And even in situations where I'm not 100% sure that I can actually damage them or not damage them, I do want to set myself up for success. Also, that Atago is, as you can see, one of the ships that I can actually penetrate. It does look like the Harbin is playing hard to get, so that's fine and all, and our use of our sonar works out there. We are well situated to avoid the torpedoes that are coming straight at us. We obviously see that there are some other torpedoes that are coming from a different position. We're going to go ahead and swing around this island. And now you can kind of see we've got this Surrey here. He is right in our face. And immediately I start sizing him up for a torpedo. Now, one thing about the torpedoes on this ship, I think I made a bit of a point talking about the stats, is that they don't respond particularly well. They're very slow. They have that weird serpentine pattern when you shoot them. I think that is one of maybe 2 torpedoes I have ever hit in this ship. You get one shot, so it's basically like a 50 caliber Derringer. If you don't understand what I mean by that because you live in Europe, here's a picture. I would not press the trigger on that. Anyway, so what we have here now is we have pretty much won A. Somebody else is going to have to take it because we're not as stealthy as we would need to be in order to take that in kind of any battleship. And certainly not this one. Aiming high for the purposes of hitting superstructure, hopefully starting some fires. That guy does have a limited number of damage control parties. For a moment we consider going to the east of this island, but it actually makes a little bit more sense to go around the outside, because our turrets are a bit too slow. It'll probably be easier to angle against the Lenin as we come around, re-angle against the Richelieu behind the island, and then hopefully take him out. I will say, in spite of... I don't really know. Usually I say that if I start including infographics, it's a pretty good indication I don't like a ship. I don't know that that's the case in this particular ship, because I do actually find Anhalt to be interesting. It's it's hard to explain. In any case, I'm trying to play into the peculiarity of this ship, and this particular build kind of works for that, and this particular sort of ship does require a bit of, I guess, non-traditional thinking in order to play it well, because it's just different. It's just different. You can't rely on it. It's gonna let you down in all of the worst places if you expect it to do normal battleship things. But if you expect it to do Anhalt things, it does Anhalt things really well. Like, probably better than any other ship other than Anhalt, strangely enough. So anyway, with Lenin out of the game, we've got a 3v3. We do have a point advantage. Well, not yet, but you can see that in a short period of time we're going to have the point advantage. This is one reason why I like this particular build, because with Reinhardt's share, you can get Velocis, you can get some extra speed from my inspirations here. You get speed from the speed flag. We're going to get pretty close to 29 knots, and that doesn't feel nearly as bad as 26.5. So we're actually making a little bit more of a difference, even though everything about this is wonky and wrong. And in a sense, it's perfect, because it shows what this ship can do with almost no help whatsoever. Because we're mostly getting speed here. The 2% on the fire chances is worthless for the most part. The other stuff is okay, I guess. We haven't even used one of our spotter aircraft. I actually find that was more often than not even really a consideration, because you can see we hit Georgia with the vast majority of our shells, even at 11-12 kilometers, somewhere in there. And he hits his Damacon. We're gonna go ahead and throw a whole bunch more HE out there. We're loading up the AP at this point. Why not? This is a review, is what I'm going to tell you here. I don't think we're going to get an opportunity to really shoot it unless he hits an island. Well, there you go. He's got 2 fires on him. We're trying to aim, as you can see, deck line, because we want to hit upper belt or in the superstructure. 8,000-9,000 damage isn't terrible. It's not good. If I had aimed at the waterline, I expect that I would have gotten all bounces and shatters. And that's just how unreliable. Well, I mean, they're not unreliable. It's just not great. It's just how not great these guns are. The George has put out our fire, so we go ahead and give him another one. Merry Christmas, everyone. Oh, and it's a Georgia W. It's the winter one. So festive. So we're doing a little bit of aiming here. Maybe. There you go. Once again, we hit at least 10 shells before the guy runs out of hit points. And that's with no help. It's with literally no help whatsoever. We haven't really even needed to use our HP recovery too much. We've used 2 heals so far, but you know, we're living high on the hog here, and at this point we're obviously investigating the opportunity to run around the outside of this island and hopefully torpedo the Gneisenau again. I mean, hitting 2 torpedoes in a single match with Anhalt might be a record. It probably isn't. Don't take that seriously. But it's not easy to do. And for the most part, you do have to be pretty close to people. I think the stationary reaction time for the torpedo at this sort of speed and detectability range is something like 11 seconds. It's a lot longer than you think it is. But unfortunately, other than showing off that we have sonar and that we can spot for our teammate, we end up not doing a great job for our teammate because he gets kind of shot to pieces in his own smoke screen. Gneisenau ends up kind of sailing around until the anchorage's torpedoes finish him off. So I guess extra set of medals for him. I did wish him a good game, and I apologized for not being more help to him, but I would prefer to have the Kraken myself. Good job there. And so that brings us to the closing thoughts on Anhalt. It's different. I'm equally likely to tell you this ship is a ship that I like, which is endlessly disappointing, as I am to tell you that this is a ship that I hate but enjoy playing. I'm probably not going to wax on about it too much. Scheer is my favorite for this ship, but I need him for München, so there's at least some chance I'll never play this because of the limited commander system. And then, I guess I don't have anything else really worthwhile to say about it. It's a weird one. I hope you guys have enjoyed the last 30 minutes. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And as always, I hope to see you on the next one. And Merry Christmas, everybody.